All right, so we are live, everyone. My name is Jesse, and I am with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. For those joining us for the first time, we're all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world. So this week is very exciting for a number of reasons. One, it is our last full, crazy, bursting with events week that we're doing of the school year, letting you guys all take a deep breath off after all these crazy times the last few months and take a bit of a summer. So we're so excited you could join us for that. It is also our Oceans Week. So starting on June 8th, this Monday, it was Oceans Day, celebrated around the world with calls to action and events. And we are blasting forth with about 25 events this week, all celebrating oceans around the world. Another thing that makes this presentation special is that it's a bit of a joint presentation. So we have been working with a group called Reach the World over the last few months. Reach the World is an amazing organization that charts long-form expeditions. They highlight that to kids around the world. So a big shout out to them. They've been a fantastic partner of ours. The reason we're all here today is for our speaker. So we are joined live by Taneil, and she is a Arctic scientist working for over 40 years with National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. We love highlighting NOAA scientists here at Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. She is going to talk about her history in the Arctic as a scientist, and also specifically focus on the MOSAIC Arctic expedition. So this is the largest Arctic expedition in history. We've done a bevy of programs on this with a huge number of scientists who've been on several of the legs. We're always excited to share it. And so without further ado, thank you so much for joining us today, Taneil, and take us away.
Well, hello, everybody. It's nice to know that you're out there. I wish I could see you and talk to you, and please do send in questions if you like. I put up the first slide just so you have a picture of me, so you know who's going to be talking. As Jesse said, my name is Taneil Uttal, and I have been in Arctic science for a long time. Jesse talked about being Ocean Science Week in the world, and I work in the Arctic Ocean, which is probably the most unexplored and unknown ocean in the world. And that's at the top of our planet, and it has got the North Pole and the South Pole are very different. I want to make a distinction because a lot of people get the Arctic and Antarctica mixed up. And Antarctica is the way we always put our globe. We think of Antarctica being at the bottom. And Antarctica is a huge land mass that is surrounded by oceans. And the Arctic, on the other hand, is an ocean that is surrounded by land. So it's truly an ocean. And because it's covered with ice much of the year, it makes it a very hard, challenging place to be. On this first slide here, I have a link at the bottom, which goes to another presentation that talks more about my life at the North Pole. So if anybody's interested in that, you can go to that link after this presentation. So as Jesse mentioned also, this is all part of something called the MOSAIC project. And if you go to Reach the World, they've got all kinds of videos and information and other presentations by the MOSAIC people or about the MOSAIC experiment. And MOSAIC is an acronym. An acronym is when you make a word out of the first letters of a whole bunch of words. So MOSAIC stands for Multidisciplinary Drifting Observatory for Study of the Arctic Climate, and I put in red all the letters that they put into MOSAIC. And I am going to play you a little 3.5-minute video right now that describes what the MOSAIC project is about.
The Arctic, the northernmost region on Earth. Cold. Remote. Even here, the extent of global warming can clearly be seen. The Arctic ice is rapidly thawing, with dramatic consequences for our climate. In order to better understand the climate processes in the Arctic, we need to take measurements year-round. To reach the central Arctic in winter, the Polarstern must freeze herself in the ice and take the natural ice drift all the way through the Arctic Ocean. This is the MOSAIC expedition. Under the direction of the Alfred Wegener Institute, scientists from all over the world are working together and have set up a research camp on the ice. This includes an ROV city, where researchers use remotely operated vehicles, ROVs, to collect observational data under the ice and transmit it back to the surface. There's also an ocean city, where the experts lower measuring equipment through holes in the ice and haul water samples to the surface. There is an ice research camp, where researchers study and observe the sea ice and snow cover. There is a Met City and Balloon Town, where the researchers collect data on the atmosphere and air composition. Up to 50 kilometers around the Central Observatory, several dozen ice monitoring stations have been installed. They drift with the camp, autonomously recording and transmitting measurement data along the way. Additionally, aircraft augment the study of the ice, atmosphere, and clouds by taking measurements from the air. Icebreakers from international partners are available to exchange scientists and crew as needed. The overall structure, the Polarstern, research camp, and surrounding measuring stations will all drift through the Arctic for an entire year, collecting valuable data. This data will be vital to understanding the Arctic climate and how it will impact the rest of the world.
Okay.
That was cool.
That was sort of my quickie introduction for everybody to MOSAIC. That gives you a great overview with the cartoons. And one of the things I'm going to talk about is they talked about the autonomous stations that are operating far away from the ship. So I am going to tell you today, the title of my presentation is going to be called The Voyages of the ASFS. And before I tell you what ASFS means, I was wondering if anybody out there knows what R2-D2 means. And R2-D2 is, of course, one of the characters in the Star Wars movie. And I wondered if you'd ever thought about what R2-D2 actually stands for. And it stands for the Robotic Droid Series 2. And this is something that scientists do a lot. Actually, I think all people do it a lot. It's you probably do it when you're texting, is people put shortcuts for things and they put just the first letters of things. So now that you understand that, you'll understand how I can introduce to you the ASFS stands for Automated Surface Flux Station. And as you saw from that little movie, we have many, many, many different kinds of instruments that we have operating out at the MOSAIC Ice Camp. And this is just one of them. And this is what we call a schematic. And this is how we started this. And that's great, Lynn, knowing that you're with a technology and kind of thing. So you'll be able to explain this to everybody. The first thing you do if you want to do something is you have to sketch out a plan of what you're going to have. So here's a plan that we did on paper, and we put down all the different kinds of instruments we wanted to have and how it would be supported on a sled and what kind of fuel system that we were going to have with it so it could run out on the ice all by itself. And here are some of the instruments that were on that sled. And we had instruments, you saw with MOSAIC, we have atmosphere science, ice scientists, ocean scientists, biological scientists. I'm one of the atmosphere scientists. So the sled the ASFS sled that we were operating had instruments for measuring things like pressure, how much water is in the air, what the winds are, what the location is, what the temperature is, and what kind of sunlight we are getting from up above. So ASFS was built according to plan in summer of 2019. And here's a picture of it sitting in the parking lot out in Boulder, Colorado, which is where my home office is. And everything was clean and nice, and we did a great job of following our plan, and we had a fuel system, and it looked like we were all ready to go up to the Arctic and plop this thing down on the ice and have it measure all those different variables and collect data for us by itself, just like an R2-D2 robot. Really, it would be able to do things on its own. The plan was that, and this is now sort of a map plan, is that we would have that ship that they showed you in the video in the very, very center here, and that would be our command center. That's where we would live. That's what we would do our work. And they showed you a lot of things like Tower and Balloon Town and the ROV, which would all be in walking distance or close to the ship, so we could live on the ship and go work around. And the ASFS systems that we had, the plan was to put them out 10 to 20 kilometers away from the ship. And that's like 6 to, I guess, 12 miles, something like that. And this was a nice looking plan. And when we actually got out there, we had this, the Arctic Ocean was frozen over with ice, and we had to find the right kind of ice. So things turned out just from the very beginning to not be exactly as planned. However, when they first put out the ASFS, we put it about 15 miles away from the main ice camp. And there it is. You saw it in the parking lot, and now it is there sitting on the Arctic ice. And everybody should realize that, again, that this is an ocean. It doesn't look like an ocean because it's not water, but this is frozen ice here. This is not ground. It's not just a flat ground here. This is ocean as far as you can see and all around for hundreds of kilometers. And the ice is sometimes a foot, 2 feet thick. Sometimes it can be 4, 6, 8, 16 feet thick. It can be very, very thick, and it's very uneven. So when we place things, we have to be very sensitive about where things are. So what was the plan on how we were going to get out to these remote stations after we put them out so far away? Because I went out to MOSAIC in November, and I stayed there through March. And that's a time at the North Pole when the sun does not come up at all. So it's completely dark. And also, because these stations are far away from where we're living, we had to take helicopters to get there. So this was very cool for me, because I got up in the morning and I'd go look at the weather, and I would check my data, because these stations had signals that they were talking to me on the ship, and they were sending me data so I could see if they were healthy and what kind of information they were gathering. But I also got to go out and visit them with helicopters. So in December 2019, I went out to the MOSAIC Ice Camp, and this is the first time that I went out to one of these stations. And it was just the most amazing experience for me. I felt like I had been working as part of a rocket crew, and we had sent a spacecraft out into space, and it had landed on another planet. And that a few months later, I had gotten to go to that planet and find my little system sitting out there, because the Arctic was so much like being on a completely different planet. It's like nothing you ever see anyplace else, anywhere else in the world. In the wintertime, it's dark all the time, but the moon comes up, and the moon is enormous, and it gives us lots of light, and there's stars all over the place. And again, remember, this is not land with snow on top of it. This is the frozen ocean. And you walk it around, and because this is ice, it gets cracks in it, and then it pushes back together and makes big humps and hills called ridges, and you hear it moving around under your feet. So I would visit it. That was my job. Sometimes it would stop talking to me, and so I would go out. Here's the helicopter back here, and I would go out to see what the station was doing. There was a box here that was full of fuel, and we had to put new fuel in about every 3 or 4 weeks. So that was another task that we had going. And my ASFS, my automated surface flux system, was not out here all by itself. This is a picture of something called a snow buoy. And there were actually 6 or 7 different kinds of instruments that were all grouped together out here on the ice that we were taking measurements with. So in talking about the voyages of the ASFS, we started having problems in the middle of the winter because the temperatures were going down to -35 and -40 degrees centigrade, which is really, really low. Here's a fun fact. In the United States here, we always do our temperatures in Fahrenheit. And so you have to do a conversion to degrees centigrade, which is where people in most of the rest of the world and scientists use. But -40 is the same temperature at degrees centigrade and degrees Fahrenheit. So it's kind of my favorite temperature because you don't have to do a conversion. So it's probably pretty close to -40 degrees. And we had this little tube here on my ASFS is where the fuel system would have a little bit of exhaust coming out. And it had tiny, tiny drops of water that came from condensation. And they started clogging up. And we started really having problems with this because when there was no airflow here anymore, then the system would shut down. So that happened a couple of times. And then we would go out and fix it. And again, that was kind of a fun work day for us because instead of going out and just changing the fuel and brushing ice off of things and being out there for maybe 45 minutes, they would actually drop us off on the ice and we would build a tent to keep ourselves warm. And we would stay out there for maybe 3, 4, 5 hours and working on repairing the fueling system and clearing out all the ice so it could work again. So this was in February and we fixed the system and it was just so beautiful out there because in the Arctic, you can't imagine how far away you are from anything else. And so you can see so many stars and you can see stars all the way down to the horizon. And this little light here is not the sun, it's actually the moon. And the reason it looks so bright is because the person who took this picture held the shutter open on his camera open for, I think, 10 seconds. So it collected lots of light because I'll tell you what, when you were actually standing there, it just looked pitch black. You couldn't hardly see anything and just see the little points of the stars. And this is me. And because it was a 10-minute exposure, I asked if I could flap my arms and make myself look like a dragonfly. And I did. So this is my dragonfly picture. This is a 10-second exposure where I flapped my wings and got myself to look like a dragonfly. So right after we fixed the fuel system, 5 days later, it completely stopped talking to us. We're talking, you know, we're sending it radio signals from the ship. We're sending it satellite signals. We're saying, talk to us, talk to us. And it wouldn't talk to us. And we were getting more and more nervous. And so we got the helicopter to take us back out and we landed and it was very dramatic. It was a darker day than usual because there was a lot of clouds and the ice had been moving around. And so the helicopter had a certain place where it liked to land and it had been broken up by the ice. So it had to search around to find a place where there was a safe piece of ice to land on. And the helicopter would go down and it would actually bump, bump, bump on the ice to make sure it wasn't going to break through before we got out. And then we got out and it was very foggy and we had our headlamps on and we were like, where is the station? Where is the station? And everything's changed. There were cracks in the ice that we had to step over and there were cracks we had to walk around that there was water in them. And then there were all these ridges that you see, which is where the ice had broken apart into cracks and then it had floated back together and pushed together and the edges had like humped up just like up into these little mountains and hills that we call ridges all over the ice. And then suddenly out of the fog, it was like, oh no, there's our station. And it is completely been eaten by this ice ridge and it's sticking up out of it. And you can see our sensors are hanging off and some of them are bent and it's upside down. And this is the sleds here and it should be at the bottom sitting down on the ice. And instead it's, you know, all jumbled up in the ice. So we did a rescue. It took 2 days. People had to go out there for 7 or 8 hours. They had to take big cables and they had to take big winches and they had to hook it up to the station. And I've got this little movie here that shows you them tipping the station back up after digging it out
I
for
don't
2
think
days.
I will get ready.
Ah, okay. Go on the other side like I was. Oh, what a beautiful moon. Okay. Oh yeah, that's really close. Okay, so I'm gonna join Eric. Okay. Oh yeah, that's really close. So we're gonna heel pull it down and I'll help you keep it upright.
Okay. All right. You're good?
Yeah, it's just...
Yeah.
Yay!
Wow.
I hope so.
Wow.
Nice. Walk on the runners, man. Ready to go. Almost.
Wow.
Nice.
Whole thing. I'll have to start over. Hang on. Let's see here. We want to be here now. So we are going to restart this presentation from here. Okay. So they got the station out. They got it back on its little sled feet that we had cleverly designed with the idea that we were going to have to be able to push it around. And then it was really easy. They just pushed it away from that big humpy ridge, you know, away from all the cracks in the ice. And they found a nice flat place to put it. And then what they did is they took all the instruments, and as you can see, some of them are bent and some of them are hanging off and the box is open. And so they took as many of the instruments off as they could and they brought them back to the ship so that we could repair it. And eventually they went with the helicopter and they attached ropes to it and they brought it all the way back to the ship and they rebuilt the whole system and they got everything running again. And the question is, where is it right now? And where it is right now is it's out on the ice, and it before was all by itself because it was like maybe 6 to 12 miles away from the ship. But now it's really by itself because the MOSAIC expedition had some unexpected problems with transportation because of the COVID-19. We couldn't fly the planes anymore. And the ships that we had planned on having come in to help people go in and out and to take food supplies, they were not available anymore because they couldn't go out. And so the Polar Stern has had to self-rescue, and it is now gone back to Norway to restock everything and to change out the people. And then it's going to go back and resume its expedition for the rest of the year. But they left at the main camp a few instruments running, and one of us was this automated surface flux station. And this is a picture of it kind of sitting all by itself, and it is doing a great job, and it is still talking to us every day and sending its data to us. And I'm going to just show you one example of the data that it's sending to us remotely, and it's selling us basically by a cell phone service, like it's almost like an app on a cell phone. And so what we have here is temperature, and this big dotted line here is 0 degrees, and that's in centigrade, and that's an important temperature in centigrade because below 0 degrees, that's where water freezes, and above 0 degrees, that's where water melts. And what you're seeing here is all this below. Okay, and here's the date down here. So this is 1 week where data got sent back from May 20th to May 28th. And you'll see that the temperatures were below 0 degrees and they were going up and down with the days, but then they suddenly started going up, 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 And on May 26th, it went above 0 degrees. And in the Arctic, that's a really, really important thing that happens. It's a major event because that means instead of freezing, the Arctic Ocean is starting to melt. And the sea ice on the Arctic Ocean is getting bigger and smaller and bigger and smaller with the years. In the wintertime, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and almost fills the whole Arctic Ocean. And in the summertime, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And how that's going to happen is determined by when the melt season starts, which always happens very quickly like this. And it did this year, and we are really excited that we are able to capture all the information about this event by leaving this automated station out there all by itself in the middle of the Arctic Ocean. So if you think about the voyages of the ASFS, you saw it sort of in the movie. It started off in Norway, it went traveling up and around, and then they deployed the ice camp and it drifted along with the near to the ice camp. I got on the ice camp somewhere around in here, and I drifted along with the ship and the ice camp to here, and then I left, and now it's been drifting now, and we probably have left ASFS somewhere around here while the ship is going to Norway to get supplies, but now it's on its way back to pick it up. And so we will have a continuous measurement record there, even though the ship and all the people had to leave. So the rest of this now, I just have a couple questions because I'm anticipating questions that you are going to have. And one of them is, where did I live when I'm sitting there in the middle of the Arctic Ocean all winter long? And I lived on this ship called the Polar Stern, and you can see little people here. And you can see, actually, they're not little people, it's just they look little because the ship's so big. And here's the gangway that we would go in and out. And they would bring the gangway up at night because they didn't want polar bears to come walking up and coming onto the ship. And we had a very strict system about checking out because you can see how dark it is around away from the lights of the ship. And we had people, we had polar bear guards, and we would go out in little groups, and we had radios, and we kept really careful track of where everybody was. And these are all the cabins up here where people actually live. And we had a cafeteria inside. They gave us wonderful meals 3 times a day. And we would watch movies when we weren't working. And they even had a swimming pool. And everybody asked me, did I see a polar bear? And the answer is yes. I saw exactly 1 polar bear. Some people at MOSAIC have seen lots of polar bears, but because I was there in the middle of the winter, I didn't see that many polar bears. I just saw a few. Or the only polar bear I saw in the middle of winter was actually when I was traveling back to Norway, and I was on a ship and they stopped the ship, and the polar bear was so curious. He came right up to the ship. And he came so close we could take these pictures like this. And this is a male polar bear. And you can kind of tell he's got scars over his eyes because he's probably been fighting with other polar bears. And the cutest animal I saw that came all the way out to the camp in the middle of the winter was these polar foxes. And they were so cute, but they were really dreadful for us for our instruments because we had cables and electrical wires running out to our instruments. And this particular fox right here chewed up a whole bunch of our cables and caused a lot of problems for us because we had to go reconnect things. And the reason that we know that this fox is absolutely guilty is if you look very closely, there's a little tiny blue fleck here on his fur. And that's a little piece of plastic, which is exactly the same color as the cables that he chewed up. So this is his guilty picture. So I'll finish up with the presentation with, we used to go out skiing around the ship sometimes just for fun. And this is one of those big pieces of ice that got ridged up here, and I put in, Taneil was here. And then the thing that I will finish up with is that I also did, we had something called a guest book where everybody from each part of MOSAIC was supposed to write about what they had, or, you know, write in people's names and let what each other was doing. And over on the side here, there's the names of everybody I was out there with out on the MOSAIC expedition, because it was really an amazing thing to work out with people in this environment and to live together and worked together for such a long time, and it was quite the experience. And so I have all the different things that I experienced in MOSAIC in this little drawing here, where I have things like, here's the fox, and here's the bear, and here's my station up here. And so you can kind of read through this and find all kinds of interesting things about my experience. And so with that, I think I'm done, and I'm happy to take any questions that you guys might have.
Fantastic, Taneil. What fun was that? Out of curiosity, while you've got this picture up still, did you draw this?
I did.
You are absurdly talented. Wow. I once drew a stick person. That's about what I can do with art. So anything
Well,
like this.
A lot of, you know, when you're gonna go someplace for 3 or 4 months, and in the Arctic, you have a lot of work you do, but you also have a lot of waiting you do. You wait for weather to be good, you wait for the ice to be right. And so you have to be very careful to take things that you like to do. Yep. And so I knit 10 hats while I was out there. And I also would do little sketches and drawings. And this particular picture I did in consultation with all the other scientists on board. I went around to them and I said, what's your most important thing that you'd like to have in our MOSAIC guest book picture?
Beautiful. Well, I really appreciate you sharing that. That's awesome. If you want to come out of screen share, we'll have that conversation. That
Sure.
would be amazing. Also, I have to stress, you are the only person ever to highlight Star Wars in a presentation and you have a dragonfly human picture, which if I knew nothing else about you other than those things, I would like you. So it's a great time. I'm going to go to Ms. Erickson's group, again, joining us in Stafford Springs, Connecticut. She's going to kick us off with a question and then we'll keep taking them. If you're on YouTube, just let me know where you're joining from, share them there as well. And Lynn, come on up.
Hi, Martin, go ahead and ask your question. They should be able to hear you.
So I had a question for when I saw the picture that you made, I was thinking of, like, is she an artist?
Well, I like to draw. I personally think everybody is an artist. All you have to do is draw a little bit and that makes you an artist, right? Because if you like to draw or paint or make things, I don't do an artist for a living. I just do it for fun.
Yeah, but you have paintings behind you too that look like they could possibly be yours as well. So you're too humble. Great question, guys. Lisa, I can come to your group too. If you have a question, just let me know in the chat bar if you do, and I'll happily come to you. It'd be nice to take one from you. In the meantime, Brooklyn and Rain joining us in Alberta want to know, what was your most dangerous work? And this can be on the MOSAIC expedition in general. Is there anything you did that was a little sketchy?
I'd say like that time that we went to find out why the flux station wasn't working, ASFS wasn't working. Excuse me. You know, the helicopter would drop us off and there would be 2 or 3 of us and we'd be walking out on ice that everything had moved around completely. And, you know, it was like, you know, it's someplace that you had been just a few days before and you could have seen your old foot tracks and taken a path to where you wanted to go. But it is really, to me, I don't think it's dangerous, but it's, to me, the thing I pay the most attention to is that you are standing on ice. You're not standing on land. And sometimes there's holes in the ice going all the way down to the water that are filled up with snow. And like I said, there's cracks. And I had a video I desperately wanted to show you and I couldn't find it, but it was a picture of some of my friends who went to work out on the ice, and then the ice actually started moving while they were out there, and they were running back to try to get back across this crack. And then it started pushing together and the ice was like ridging up and they had to crawl over these blocks of moving ice, which was probably pretty risky to get back to the ship. And I know I've heard stories of the people who came after me where a crack opened up and they were separated from the ship and they had to wait for the helicopter to actually come get them back.
Yeah.
So we had a lot of safety equipment. We had, whenever we went out, we had tents and we had suits for we had things to wrap people up in if they did fall in the water and get wet. And we had really a lot of safety gear.
This is something that everyone on MOSAIC has highlighted. And this is true of every major scientific expedition. I mean, you don't go into something like this lightly. This is a potentially dangerous environment, and something certainly where even the temperatures you're talking about, you need to be very, very well prepared. And I'm glad we got that message in. Let me take one from Susan online. I think I know the answer to this, Taneil, but we'll ask it anyway. Would you do this again?
I would love to do this again. To tell you the truth, there was another year-long ice camp project that was 22 years ago, and I went on that project. And when I went on that project, I fell in love with the Arctic, absolutely, and doing work there. And I think I've been waiting 22 years for MOSAIC to come along so I can go again. And yes, I would love to go again if the opportunity comes up.
Fantastic. I always like to highlight too with the Arctic, it's so interesting because you're a top scientist, you get the opportunity to do this in a very engaged way for many months, but so many Canadians, and we have such a big Canadian audience, don't even think about the Arctic as a place they can go. And even if it's Arctic adjacent, there's such a huge habitat out there that is so spectacular. I mean, from your pictures, from your stories. So just want to do a plug for that you can explore these places no matter where your walk of life is, and I'd encourage you to do so. It's really important.
Oh, Canada, you're so lucky if you're Canadian because you have lots and lots of Arctic, and go look at a map and most of the Arctic is in either Canada or Russia.
Yep.
And so the United States has a little tiny bit of Alaska, but we're sticking our noses into the Arctic when really the Arctic is a Canadian and a Russian place. And the expedition I did 22 years ago was on Canadian icebreakers. And so I'm very familiar. And I also, you could look up in Google, I also work at 2 Canadian land stations called Eureka and Alert.
Oh, cool.
And they're at the they're in Nunavut. And the Canadian Arctic is the most amazing place ever. And there are a lot of opportunities, I think, to go and do studies and work and to become familiar with that part of your country. So if you're from Canada, go for it.
We did a whole feature with a gentleman named Dan Weaver on the Pearl Research Station in Eureka, and it's really spectacular. By the way, you're as an American, you're so highlighting my country, so I almost want to break into the national anthem, but we'll save that for another program. I'm going to take one more question from YouTube, and I'll come back to you, Lynn, in a second. So Ryan wants to know, have you ever gotten frostbite while you've been out working in any of these expeditions?
You know what? I was really worried about frostbite when I was up there, and I was absolutely very, very, very careful. And I was very alarmed to watch some of the people who were coming up to the Arctic for the first time or coming up to the winter Arctic for the first time. Several people got, I guess I'm not going to call it frostbite quite, because frostbite means that you actually damage your cells permanently. And it's a really serious condition, but people were getting towards frostbite. They would have frost blisters on their cheeks and their nose, and then on the tips of their fingers. And actually, one of the things I started knitting is what I called nose warmers, because what people would do is they would wear their buffs, and then they'd have their hoods, and then you'd have your goggles or your glasses, but it'd be really hard to cover just this little part here without having all your breath steam up, your eyes and stuff like that. Yeah. And so I knit these little nose warmers that actually got to be quite popular, and people were wearing those. So no, I did not, but I will have to tell you, and we also had hand warmers. We had little packets that you could break open, and then they'd be warm, and we'd put them in our boots and in our gloves.
Fantastic. It's a way to ingratiate yourself to all the other shipmates is to make little things to help protect them from the elements. That's a good plan. All right, let's go back to Ms. Erickson. If you have another question for us from one of your students, go for it.
Yes, so Jordan's going to unmute his mic and he's going to ask a question. And I have one from Luke as well.
Cool.
Go ahead, Jordan, unmute your mic, please.
How long were you on the ice for when you did that job? How long were you on the ice for?
Yeah. I was there for 4.5 months, and it was, it took a long time for the ice to get to the ice camp, because I was going out there in the winter when the ice was very thick. So I was 3 weeks on a Russian icebreaker going to the camp. Wow. And then I was at the camp for 10 weeks, which is 2.5 months. And then I was on the same icebreaker to get back to Norway, it took about 5 weeks. So
Wow.
altogether, I think I was gone about 4.5 months.
Holy. Just a quick point of clarification on that, just in case this question meant literally like on the ice. So on a given day, so you're out there for all this time, do you go out on the ice to actually work on the, like when walking around every day? Do you do it some of the time? How long at a time? Yeah.
I personally went to the ice every day. I either took the helicopter like I showed you out to those remote stations, but I didn't do that every day. But what I did do every day is I would walk out to the instruments that we had that were around the ship. But I would only be out on the ice for maybe an hour or two. The atmospheric scientists tended to have a lot of instruments that ran by themselves and just needed to be checked. There were people who did the ice scientists. Those guys were out on the ice like for 8 or 10 hours every single day. It was just, they were like, it was superhero team. They would get all geared up and they would go out. They'd take snowmobiles away from the ship and they would be drilling holes in the ice and they would be collecting samples. And so some people spent really a lot of time on the ice.
Super cool. It's all super cool. Taneil, don't short trip yourself for a few hours. I mean, that is an incredible thing and an incredible place. And you highlighted that it's sort of like a rocket mission, like it's like a whole other planet and it's spectacular. So, oh, what a fun presentation. Lynn, if you want to ask one more question, we're amazingly near the end of our talk and our time. So Lynn, have your other student come on up and then we'll do a wrap up after that.
Okay, Luke, do you want to ask your question? You can unmute your mic.
How long have you been working?
How long have I been working? I have been working for almost 40 years. Most people out at the ship were much, much younger than me. I probably was the oldest person out there and they kind of thought of me about the ship mom, I think. So yes, I've been working really long time.
I have to follow up before we do like a wrap up question. Have you always been this like ridiculously enthusiastic? Because it's it's infectious.
I don't know. You could, my sister's online. I can see my sister. Maybe my sister can comment on that.
Well, bugger. It's funny.
I've always been a very happy person and I've always been very interested in what I'm doing.
Fantastic. Well, we so appreciate you taking the time to share it with us today. And before we wrap up, is there any last message you'd like to share with kids that are watching? We've got, again, people from all over Canada and the States, you know, whether it's encouraging them to get out in nature or your own experiences in the Arctic or anything you want to wrap us up with.
I think most kids I talk to, they seem to think like being scientists is something that's super hard and you can only do if you're super smart and super good at math. And I think that that's not true. I think the only thing you need to do to be a scientist is be interested in your world. And like I had that little picture that had little tiny pictures of everything that happened at this ice camp, but you can do that at your house. Like right now, you can go into your garden and find bugs. You can probably find spiders in your bathroom. You've got a cat or just, you know, you might have tools someplace. You can build things and, you know, you can record your own life. And the minute you're recording, you talked about being an artist, but that's kind of part of being an observationalist is that you just look at your world and you record it somehow. And you either do it with numbers or you can do it with pictures, but that's what being a scientist is being interested and making a record of the world around you. And I think anybody can do that and it's fun and you can do it any place. And if that makes you happy because you're something interested in doing, then you should do it.
Taneil, what a beautiful message to end off with. I mean, Lynn's nodding her head. YouTube people are saying thank you so much for that. So like that's a lovely way to end. I really, really appreciate you being here with us today. Lynn, if you want to demute your microphone, if any of your students or you just want to join me in saying a big thank you, go for it. So Taneil, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being interested, everybody.
Awesome.
And
Thank you.
bye.
Bye. We'll let you go for now. Thanks so much. You're our last Reach the World joint MOSAIC presentation of the year. Couldn't think of a better way to wrap it up, and we're excited to dive back in September. You're welcome back anytime, as that was a hoot. And now I've got to go do another session. They just don't stop this week, Taneil. It's just too much fun we're all having. But I wish you a wonderful rest of your day, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great day.
All right.